You need to understand something, Mom. Martin and I have decided. His family is our priority now. You'll always come last." My son nodded. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the table between us, the same table I'd had for 23 years, the one he used to do his homework on after school, and he nodded like she'd said something completely reasonable. I remember thinking, I should say something. Something sharp, something that would make them both sit back in their chairs. But instead, I just looked at my daughter-in-law's face, so composed, so certain, and I said, "Well, good to know." She blinked. I think she expected tears. I didn't give her any. That conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in late October. I know because I'd made beef stew. It was the first cold snap of the season, the kind of evening that makes you want something warm on the stove. And I'd called my son that morning to invite them over. He'd said yes. He'd sounded almost happy about it. When they arrived, my daughter-in-law had barely taken off her coat before she asked me to sit down. I should have known then. Her name is Melissa. She's 34, organized in the way that makes other people feel chaotic, and she has a habit of presenting things as already decided, not as conversations, but as announcements. My son Nathan is 37. He's always been what I'd call gentle. Too gentle sometimes. The kind of man who finds it easier to agree than to stand in the middle of a room and say what he actually thinks. We'd had our tensions before, the three of us. Little things, mostly. Christmas plans that somehow always ended up at her parents' place in Markham. Birthdays that got moved without much notice. A gradual sense, over the past 2 or 3 years, that I was being quietly edited out. But that evening, for the first time, it was said out loud. "We've been talking about boundaries," Melissa continued. She used that word the way people use it when they want to sound reasonable while doing something unkind. "Martin's parents are getting older and they need more of our time and energy. We have to be realistic about what we can offer." "Martin is your father-in-law," I said. "My son is Nathan." She didn't even pause. Right, of course, Nathan's in-laws. My son was still looking at the table. I served the stew. We ate. They left 40 minutes later, and I sat in my kitchen afterward with the leftovers going cold on the stove, and I thought, I raised that boy. I drove him to hockey practice at 5:30 in the morning. I worked double shifts at the hospital for 3 years so he could finish his degree without student loans. I held his hand at his father's funeral when he was 19 and didn't know what to do with his hands. And he sat at my kitchen table and nodded. I didn't sleep well that night, but by morning something had shifted in me. Not anger, something quieter than anger, something that felt almost like clarity. If I was going to be last, then I was going to make very sure I had somewhere good to stand. The house had been feeling too big for a while, if I'm honest. 3 bedrooms, a backyard I barely used anymore, a basement full of things I kept meaning to sort through. My husband Gerald had died 6 years earlier, and for the first couple of years I'd kept everything exactly as it was because changing anything felt like erasing him. Then slowly I'd started to let things go. His winter coats, his golf clubs, the second car we'd kept in the driveway even though I never drove it. But the house itself I'd held on to because Nathan was close. Because I thought I had believed, genuinely, that staying nearby mattered. That proximity was a kind of relationship maintenance. After that Tuesday evening, I started thinking differently. I called my friend Paulette the next morning. We've known each other for 31 years. We met at the hospital where we both worked. She as a physiotherapist and me as a registered nurse, and we survived shift work and difficult supervisors, and our respective divorces, and her breast cancer diagnosis, and my husband's illness together. She's the kind of friend who doesn't make you explain the long version of things. Sell the house, she said, before I'd even finished. I haven't said anything about selling the house. You're about to. I heard her set down her coffee cup. How much is it worth now? The neighborhood had changed over the years. The bungalow I'd bought with Gerald for $240,000 in 1998 was now, according to the property assessment that had arrived in September, worth just over $900,000. Almost $1 million, I said. Paulette made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Then you have options. I did have options. That was the thing I kept turning over in my mind in the days that followed. I had a pension from 32 years in nursing. I had Gerald's life insurance, which I'd invested carefully and not touched. I had CPP and OAS starting in 2 years. And I had a house worth nearly $1 million that I was rattling around in alone, keeping it warm mostly out of habit and proximity to a son who had just told me I ranked below his in-laws. I called a realtor in November. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I didn't do any of this out of spite. Or not only out of spite. I did it because that conversation had cracked something open in me, and what came through the crack was a question I should have asked myself years earlier. What do you actually want your life to look like? I was 64 years old. I was healthy. I had resources. I had, as Paulette kept reminding me, options. What I wanted, when I sat with the question honestly, was somewhere smaller. Somewhere that didn't require a riding mower and a furnace inspection every fall and a whole afternoon just to vacuum properly. I wanted to be near water. I'd grown up in Victoria on Vancouver Island, and I'd moved east with Gerald when we were young and ambitious, and I'd never quite stopped missing the Pacific. Not dramatically, not in a way I talked about, just a quiet, persistent missing. The way you miss something that's been gone so long you've stopped expecting it to come back. I spent 2 weeks researching, not just dreaming, actually researching. I looked at condos in Victoria and in Nanaimo and in a small town on the Saanich Peninsula that Paulette had mentioned once. I talked to a financial advisor, a woman named, well, she wasn't anyone Nathan knew, which was the point. I ran the numbers. I understood what I could afford, what my monthly income would look like, what I was walking away from, and what I was walking toward. I found a condo in Sydney, just north of Victoria. 2 bedrooms. This detail matters. I'll come back to it. On the 3rd floor, with a view of the water and a covered balcony where I could sit with my coffee in the morning. 850 square feet. Strata fees that fit easily within my budget. A building with an elevator and a small gym and a rooftop garden where residents grew tomatoes in the summer. I made an offer in January. I didn't tell Nathan until February, after the sale of the house had gone firm and the moving date was confirmed. He called me on a Sunday evening. I'd been waiting for the call. I'd sent him an email the week before with the details, dates, my new address, my reasoning, and I'd given him time to sit with it. "You're moving to BC?" he said. "Yes." Without, "You didn't even talk to us about this." I noticed the us. I noticed it very much. "I didn't know I needed to," I said. "You've made it clear that your priorities are elsewhere. I'm just adjusting mine." There was a long silence. I could hear Melissa's voice somewhere in the background, not words, just the tone of someone asking a question. "Mom, you're 4 hours away on a plane. I know how far it is. What about the grandkids? You can't just." He stopped. This feels like you're punishing us. I thought about that for a moment. Nathan, I said finally, do you remember what Melissa said when you were here in October? What she said about priorities? Another silence. I took her at her word. I said, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just, finally, putting myself first. I flew to Sydney in March, 2 weeks after the movers. The first morning I woke up in my new place, I lay in bed for a few minutes and listened. There was no traffic. There was a gull somewhere outside. There was pale light coming through the curtains and the faint smell of salt air even through the sealed windows. I got up and made coffee and took it out to the balcony. The water was there, the way I'd known it would be, but hadn't quite believed. The Haro Strait, gray-green in the morning light, with the San Juan Islands a dark line in the distance, a small sailboat tacking slowly toward the marina, a heron standing on the breakwater like it had been there since before the building was built. I sat there for a long time. I called Paulette, who'd driven up from Victoria to help me unpack the week before. I think I'm going to be fine, I told her. Of course you are, she said. You always were. My days settled into a rhythm I hadn't had in years. Morning coffee on the balcony. A walk along the waterfront path before the tourists arrived. Groceries from the small market on Beacon Avenue where the owner knew my name within a month. A watercolor class on Wednesday evenings at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try and never made time for. Dinners with Paulette once or twice a week. A book club that met at the library on the first Thursday of the month. I spoke to Nathan by phone every week or two, politely, briefly. He asked about the condo, I asked about the kids. We moved around the conversation the way you move around furniture that's been rearranged, carefully, not quite used to the new layout. Melissa was friendly on the occasions she was in the background, carefully friendly. The way people are when they're not sure if they've won or lost something. My grandchildren, Nathan and Melissa's 2 boys, aged 9 and 11, sent me drawings through the mail. Owen, the older one, drew me a picture of a whale and wrote, "Hope you see real ones," in his careful printing. I cried at the kitchen table over that drawing in a way I hadn't cried in months. I framed it and put it on the windowsill in the second bedroom. The second bedroom had a proper bed, a dresser. Enough space for 2 boys to set up sleeping bags on the floor if they wanted. I'd thought about it when I chose the unit. I'd thought about it on purpose. Spring arrived, then summer. The tourists came and the market got busy, and the heron on the breakwater became a fixture of my mornings, the way the coffee was a fixture. I had a life, a real one, mine shaped by what I actually wanted rather than by proximity to people who'd made it clear I was optional. In July, I got a letter from Nathan, an actual letter, handwritten, which was so unlike him that I sat with it unopened for a few minutes before I could bring myself to read it. He wrote that he was sorry, not with explanations or conditions, just that he was sorry, that he'd thought about that evening a great deal, that he hadn't handled it well, that he should have said something when Melissa spoke. He wrote that he loved me and that the boys missed me. He wrote that Owen had been asking to visit. I wrote back. It took me 3 drafts to say what I wanted to say, which was this: I love you. I am not closing any doors. But I have learned something this year about what it costs to arrange your life around people who don't arrange theirs around you. I am not doing that anymore. If you want to be part of my life, I am here. The door is open, but you have to walk through it. He called the next day. We talked for an hour and a half. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years, maybe since Gerald died. He cried at one point, which he tried to hide, and I pretended not to notice, which is what mothers do. The call I wasn't expecting came in September. It was Nathan, and I could tell from the first 3 words, "Mom, something's happened," that this was different from our weekly check-ins. Melissa's father had had a severe stroke. He was in the ICU at Sunnybrook in Toronto. It was serious. The family was in shock. Melissa was barely sleeping, barely eating, spending every day at the hospital. I listened. I said I was so sorry, and I meant it. Whatever had passed between Melissa and me, her father was in the hospital, and she was frightened. That's just a human being in pain. And then Nathan said, "Mom, we're really struggling. Financially, I mean. Melissa took emergency leave, and I've had to cut back my hours to be with the kids, and her father's care is going to be, it's expensive. We were wondering if—" He stopped. "If what?" I said, though I knew. "If you could help us out. A loan. 50,000 if you could. We pay it back, I swear, once things stabilize." I sat with that for a moment. $50,000. 2 years ago in the house with the account Gerald and I had built together, I would have said yes without thinking. I would have transferred the money that same afternoon and told him not to worry about paying it back. But I thought about October. I thought about the kitchen table and the stew going cold. I thought about priorities and you'll always come last, and my son staring at the wood grain while his wife rearranged the terms of our relationship. And I thought about something else too. Something Paulette had said to me back in November when I was still planning. Make sure any help you give is documented, not because you don't trust him, because you need to protect yourself. That's not cold, that's just being an adult. I thought about the question I'd never asked myself in all those years of giving. What happens to me if this goes wrong? "Nathan," I said, "I love you, and I'm truly sorry about what your family is going through, but I can't give you $50,000. A silence. "Can't or won't?" "Both," I said honestly. He didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing. "I want to help you," I said. "I genuinely do. But not this way. If you need emotional support, I'm here. If you need someone to fly in and be with the boys so you and Melissa can be at the hospital, I will book the flight tomorrow. If you need help navigating the healthcare system or understanding what questions to ask, 32 years as a nurse, Nathan, I know how to do that. What I won't do is hand over $50,000 with a handshake and a promise, and I think if you're honest with yourself, you know why." Another silence. Longer. "October," he said quietly. "October?" I said. He exhaled. It was a complicated sound, not angry exactly. Something more like a man recognizing his own reflection in a window when he wasn't expecting to see it. "What if we did it properly?" he said. "A formal loan agreement, signed." I paused. That was not the response I'd anticipated. "I'm listening," I said. "I mean it. A real document. I'll have a lawyer draw it up. Terms, interest rate, repayment schedule, everything. Not a favor. A loan." I thought about it. I thought about the letter he'd written in July. The hour-and-a-half phone call, Owen's whale drawing on my windowsill. I thought about the fact that he was, at his core, the boy who'd held my hand at his father's funeral and not known what to do with his grief. "Get the lawyer to draw it up," I said. "Send it to me before I sign anything. I'll have someone review it on my end." "Okay," he said. His voice had changed. something steadier in it, like a person who's been given something real to hold on to. Okay, I'll do that. I flew to Toronto 10 days later, not with a check, the paperwork wasn't done yet, but with my overnight bag and my nursing instincts and 30 years of knowing how to sit with a family in crisis. I spent 4 days there. I stayed with Nathan and the boys while Melissa was at the hospital. I made meals. I helped Owen with a school project on the Métis Nation that was due that Friday. I took the younger one, a 7-year-old named, well, he called himself Benny, though his name was Benjamin, to the park twice and to the library once, and at bedtime he fell asleep against my arm while I read to him, and I sat very still for a long time so I wouldn't wake him. On the third evening, Melissa came home from the hospital earlier than usual. She sat down at the kitchen table, a different table from mine, but a kitchen table just the same, and she looked exhausted in the way that goes all the way down. I made her tea. She looked at the cup and then at me and said, "Thank you." It wasn't an apology. I didn't need it to be. It was just 2 words from a tired woman to another woman who'd chosen to show up anyway. "Your father is lucky to have someone fighting for him," I said. She nodded. Her eyes filled, and she turned toward the window. We sat in the kitchen until Nathan got home. We didn't say much, but we were there, in the same room, and that was something neither of us had managed in a long time. The loan agreement arrived in my email on a Tuesday. I forwarded it to a lawyer in Sydney, a woman I'd been referred to by someone in my book club, competent and direct in the way I like, and she reviewed it and said it was sound. 25,000, not 50. That was what Nathan had revised it to, which I thought showed judgment. Interest at prime +1. Repayment over 4 years, monthly installments, with a clause allowing early repayment without penalty. I signed it. I transferred the money the same day. I'm telling this story from my balcony. It's October again, a year now since that dinner, since the stew, since my son looked at the table instead of at me. The heron is on the breakwater. The coffee is good. Nathan calls every Sunday now, not out of obligation, or if it is, at least it's a chosen obligation, which is a different thing. The boys are coming to stay in December, both of them sleeping bags on the floor of the second bedroom, and Owen has apparently already told his class he's going to see whales. I don't know what the next few years hold. Melissa's father is still recovering, slowly. The loan payments come in on the 1st of every month without fail, which I find quietly meaningful in a way that has nothing to do with the money. Paulette and I are talking about taking the ferry to Salt Spring Island in the spring. I am 65 years old. I live in a condo by the water with the heron outside my window and a watercolor class on Wednesday evenings and a second bedroom with a proper bed. Last October, I was told I would always come last. I decided to take that seriously. It turned out to be the best thing anyone ever did for me. I keep thinking about that kitchen table, the beef stew going cold, my son staring at the wood grain while his wife rearranged the terms of our relationship like furniture she decided to move without asking. What I've come to understand, not right away, but slowly, the way you understand things that matter, is that what happened that October evening was a kind of gift, a painful one, the kind that doesn't look like a gift at all when you're sitting in the dark afterward, but turns out to be exactly the thing you needed to finally ask yourself the question you'd been avoiding for years. There's something I've noticed about the people I've respected most in my life. It's not that they were never hurt. It's that they made honest decisions in hard moments. When Melissa said what she said, the honest thing, the decent thing, wasn't to explode or beg or quietly absorb it and carry on as though nothing had changed. The honest thing was to take her at her word, to treat my own life as something worth organizing intentionally. I think that's what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not a grand gesture, just a quiet decision to stop arranging yourself around people who've told you clearly that you're an afterthought. The harder part was Nathan, because love doesn't stop when someone disappoints you. That's not how it works, and anyone who's raised a child knows it. What I had to figure out in those long evenings in Sydney with the water outside my window was the difference between loving someone and funding their choices, between being available and being exploited, between an open door and a revolving one. That took real thought. It took me sitting down with my own finances, my own needs, my own future, and asking what is actually wise here, not just what feels kind in the moment. Kindness without judgment isn't kindness. It's just avoidance, wearing a warmer coat. And then September came. Nathan called with his voice pulled tight and his pride set aside, and the world expected me to fold. To prove that love means writing a check no matter what came before, but I'd spent a year learning something different. I'd learned that the most useful thing I could offer wasn't money. It was presence, competence. A mother who'd spent 32 years in nursing, showing up with her overnight bag and her actual self, that took a different kind of courage than the check would have. It would have been easier, honestly, to just transfer the money and feel like I'd done something. What Nathan did next, asking for a proper loan agreement, not a favor, told me more about who he still was underneath everything than any conversation we'd had in years. That took something from him. It took him being willing to be accountable, and I think that moment, more than any other, was when I understood that the year hadn't broken us. It had just forced us both to grow up a little more than we'd planned. I'm not the same woman who sat at that kitchen table and said good to know with her chest tight and her hands in her lap. I'm someone who got up the next morning and made a plan. Someone who asked herself hard questions and answered them honestly. Someone who learned later than she should have, but not too late, that putting yourself first isn't selfishness. It's the only way you have anything real left to give. The heron is on the breakwater. The coffee is good. Owen's drawing of the whale is still on the windowsill. That's enough. That's more than enough.